tonight. Invasion imminent. Israeli forces amassed on the border with Gaza are a go to move in against Hamas, even amid roadblocks ahead of the first shipments of humanitarian aid across the border with Egypt. Plus,
I think the American people are thirsty for change.
Another vote for Speaker in the leaderless House. And inside the Hermit Kingdom. A new film highlights the treacherous journey of defectors from North Korea. All this and more on Faith Nation. Two U.S. hostages held by Hamas now free. Welcome to Faith Nation from our studio in Washington. I'm Matt Gelka. Information is still coming in, but here's what we know right now. Israel confirming Hamas released two U.S. hostages, a mother and a daughter. They were held in custody since the October 7th massacre in Israel. We don't know their names or ages right now, but reports say they were released because of, quote, humanitarian reasons, and that it happened thanks to mediations by Qatar. That's the latest we have as of the recording of this broadcast. Make sure to stay with CBNNews.com and the CBN News YouTube page for all of the latest. Joining us now, our CBN News Middle East Bureau Chief, Chris Mitchell from Jerusalem. Chris, I know it's been a long couple of weeks. We appreciate you staying up late for us right now, too. First off, do we know anything more about the folks that were released?
Yeah, Matt, we do. It's actually a 59-year-old mother and 18-year-old daughter, Yehudit and Nathalie. Understand right now that they've been released through the Rafah crossing and all the way actually here in Israel right now. There had been a 6-hour delay in the bombing of the Gaza Strip. Reportedly, that would have been a time when they could have gotten out of some of those tunnels and made it all the way through Egypt and back here to Israel. You know, Matt, this is a huge dilemma for Israel right now because it seems like what the Hamas is doing now is that they can take these hostages, maybe 2 by 2 or maybe 4 or 5, and try to continue to delay this ground incursion that seems very imminent. It seems like the U.S. and the EU are pressuring Israel right now to give time to release these hostages. But Hamas could delay this for days or weeks and really an attempt likely to delay any ground invasion of the Gaza Strip.
You know, the reason being given here, humanitarian reasons, yet there are still some 200 people, many of them Americans, being held hostage by Hamas. Does this give you any new hope for them?
Well, it does. You know, maybe they'll be releasing another couple, another few. It's notable that this was a dual citizens, Israeli Americans. That may be an attempt to actually dissuade or appeal to Americans that the rest of the Americans would be freed. But I think this is, as I said, you know, really a potential delaying tactic by Hamas with over 200 hostages right now, 201 right now that we know of, used to be 203. So it really puts the Israeli military and political leadership in a dilemma. What can they do if they decide to go ahead with the ground invasion? Does that put the other 201 hostages in peril? As we were talking about this earlier this evening, Matt, here in the Bureau, you know, we wouldn't want to be in their position right now.
Yeah, and you mentioned this delayed tactic as we're all sort of gearing up to see if and when this ground war does start here. Israel already saying it does not plan long-term control of the Gaza Strip after this war with Hamas. What does that tell you about Israel's endgame here?
Well, the end game is a big question right now. I mean, it's likely that a military incursion eventually may take weeks, even months, to eradicate Hamas as a terror group and a threat on the southern border. But what happens after that? Historically, Matt, you can look back to, I think, in 1967, when Israel actually captured not only Gaza, but also the Sinai Peninsula. And Israel had a dilemma. How were they going to control or govern all the people there in Gaza? So I don't think they want to stay necessarily and govern them. But the question is, who's going to take authority? Who's going to govern that place? Would it be the Palestinian Authority? Perhaps that's what the United States government has in mind. But there's a lot of problems with the Palestinian Authority, who in many ways actually have been supporting Hamas to some degree.
And Chris, as we're ending here quickly, we've seen some U.S. forces intercept some missiles and drones. How worried are you that this could quickly spiral out of control and into a major regional conflict with a country like Iran?
Well, Matt, there's a lot of concern about that. Not only those missiles fired by the warship in the Red Sea, but also 3 separate incidents, we believe, in Syria where there have been drone attacks, likely as a result of orders from Tehran. So there are possibilities. It could go into a regional conflict, and that's where a lot of people are concerned right now.
Yeah, well, Chris Mitchell, you've been working round the clock. Please continue to stay safe, and God bless you out there, brother.
Thanks, Matt.
Our humanitarian aid and military help is on the way to the Middle East, with U.S. warships already mobilized to intercept danger. In Thursday's primetime Oval Office address, President Biden declared U.S. leadership holds the world together, adding the country must deepen support for both Israel and Ukraine in the middle of 2 very different wars. CBN's Hillary Powell is looking into next steps the president wants to take. And Hillary, what more are we learning about the potential future of the region?
Well, Matt, Israel's defense minister is saying that after forces dismantle the Hamas terror group, the IDF does not plan to control, quote, life in Gaza. Meanwhile, President Biden is actually looking beyond the region, asking Congress for $105 billion in foreign aid.
What would happen if we walked away? We are the essential nation.
In only his second Oval Office address, President Joe Biden is pushing to stand firmly with U.S. allies Ukraine and Israel in a time of war.
We cannot and will not let terrorists like Hamas and tyrants like Putin win. I refuse to let that happen.
The president cites U.S. national security interests while including the promise of humanitarian aid to Palestinians. Some aid already remains on standby. Satellite photos analyzed Friday by the Associated Press show a convoy lined up at the Rafah border crossing on the Egyptian side, likely waiting for approval to cross into the Gaza Strip. President Biden is expanding his funding request as part of a sweeping set of proposals to bolster allies abroad, invest more in domestic defense manufacturing, and manage the influx of migrants crossing into the U.S. The total cost pegged at just over $105 billion, including roughly $60 billion for Ukraine and $14 billion for Israel. U.S. military in the region already taking action with the intercept of multiple cruise missiles and drones launched by Iranian-backed rebels in Yemen. Additional fighters are set to join U.S. warships already in the Mediterranean. Protesters marched from several mosques to the U.S. Embassy in Indonesia to denounce Israeli airstrikes on the Gaza Strip as the IDF signals an imminent ground invasion. The president is promoting tolerance and peace.
We must, without equivocation, denounce anti-Semitism. We must also, without equivocation, denounce Islamophobia. And to all you hurting, those of you hurting, I want you to know I see you.
President Biden hopes that combining all of these issues might create a necessary political coalition in order to get that congressional approval. Matt.
Hillary, is the president fighting an uphill battle here? I mean, what are the viable next steps?
It looks to be an uphill battle. He's a Democratic president, and he is facing some immediate complications on Capitol Hill. The House right now is still at a standstill, unable to pass legislation as the Republican majority struggle to choose a new leader, a new speaker, and it could also get bogged down in a divided Senate. Matt.
Certainly a lot to keep our eyes on. Hillary, thank you. Well, amid a worldwide State Department advisory for Americans abroad, the director of the FBI already warning of increased terror threats inside the United States. Security experts continue sounding the alarm that America is at risk of attacks similar to what Israel experienced. As Dale Hurd reports, our borders are vulnerable, and data confirms terrorists have snuck through.
Under questioning by FBI agents, New Yorker Ali Karani admitted in 2017 to being a member of something called Unit 910. It's the Black Ops unit of Hezbollah, controlled by Iran. Karani told agents he was trained to be a suicide bomber and was scouting targets in New York City. He's now in prison. Another Unit 910 member in prison this year, New Jersey resident Alexei alias Alex Saab, had also scouted potential targets around New York City. While the exact number of Hamas and Hezbollah sleeper cells operating within the United States is not known, a comprehensive study by George Washington University last year found the most Hezbollah activity in Michigan, New York, North Carolina, and California. If Americans are wondering if they're safe from the kind of attack Hamas carried out against Israel, terrorism experts say the answer is not encouraging. Former FBI Special Agent Eric Caron.
We have over 1,000 joint terrorism task force cases going on here in America today relating to Muslim extremists.
So far this year, authorities have caught 151 people on the FBI's terrorism watch list, trying to illegally enter the U.S. through the southern border. That's 50 times higher than 2 years ago. Most are coming through Panama's Darien Gap, where journalist Michael Yan says he's seeing 3,000 to 5,000 migrants pass through every day on their way to the U.S.
I see a lot of Chinese coming through. Most of the people you see coming through are military-age males of any sort, right? I see Afghans coming in by the thousands. I've had people come through that say they're from Gaza.
CBN News correspondent Chuck Holton has also reported from the Darien Gap and says he has no doubt dangerous persons are headed for the U.S. border.
I interviewed a guy from Afghanistan. We found many people from Somalia and Yemen. We found people from Syria, Iran. We have seen people coming through.
Former Agent Caron is especially concerned about America's ports, where Customs and Border Protection is supposed to scan every incoming container for radiation, but physically inspects only 3%.
We have 328 ports of entry into America. They all have to be secure, and many of them are soft.
Former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy warned this week that what happened in Israel could happen here. McCarthy said, "We should wake up ourselves. We could have the same thing happen next week to us. Our intel is never perfect, and we've got a wide-open border."
The idea that they don't want to attack us again like a 9/11, but even bigger, is foolish. They want to attack us. They want to destroy America.
Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Well, here in Washington, the drama continues after the House failed to elect a speaker in another vote today. Ohio Republican Jim Jordan lost a third ballot, this time losing more Republican votes, with 25 members of his party voting for someone else. Jordan was adamant ahead of the vote that he planned to keep trying to sway votes his direction.
You all said that we were going to lose between the first vote and the second vote. You all said we were going to lose 10 to 15 votes. We stayed the same. We picked up a few. We lost a few. I think the ones we lost can come back. So, look, there's been multiple rounds of votes for Speaker before. We all know that. I just know that we need to get a Speaker as soon as possible so we can get to work for the American people.
But after the vote, Jordan lost a secret ballot and is no longer the Republican nominee for Speaker. The conference will try to pick a new candidate on Monday. Well, coming up, inflation, unemployment, and war in Israel. All things impacting the economy. We'll talk about it in just 2 minutes. Welcome back. Persistent inflation, coupled with the wars in Israel and Ukraine, is adding uncertainty to an economy already in flux. The president's big ask last night for northward of $100 billion in aid and resources to Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan, and for the U.S. border with Mexico, only adding to that. Here's what Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen had to say in Luxembourg ahead of Biden's Oval Office address.
America can certainly afford to stand with Israel and to support Israel's military needs. And we also can and must support Ukraine in its struggle against Russia. And look, the American economy is doing extremely well.
Well, Mark Hamrick is the Washington bureau chief and senior economic analyst for Bankrate. Mark, it must be Friday, so that's why we're talking to you. Welcome back, as always. Now, the president wants Congress to sign off on another $100 billion for foreign resources, including support for Israel and Ukraine. What do you make of Secretary Yellen's remarks that we just heard of in light of all of that? Is the U.S. able to absorb these additional costs?
I think those are sort of two different issues. The question of funding our foreign policy needs and the strength of the U.S. economy, aside from burgeoning debt and deficits. The Treasury Secretary wasn't addressing that latter issue, which is increasingly a concern, particularly right now, Matt, when we're watching yields in the Treasury market continue to edge higher. And this is reflecting some of the concern about the burgeoning deficit. How lawmakers go about funding that is a key question. And the reality is that in recent years, our elected officials, members of Congress, have essentially made financial commitments that they haven't come up with revenues for, and you create those revenues through taxation.
And right now, Congress isn't able to do anything to even find some of those revenues as long as the House isn't working. Well, Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell is leaving the prospect of additional rate hikes on the table, while signaling if inflation cools, the Fed could put an end to further hikes this year. What needs to happen to stop the next round of hikes, and how long do you expect the Fed to hold interest rates at their current level?
Financial markets right now are betting that the Fed is done raising interest rates. The Fed isn't decided on that question. They have a meeting November 1st. That's one of two final meetings for this year. The reality is, Matt, that rates could remain at their current level as long as inflation continues to remain stable or go lower. And that level of rates becomes increasingly restrictive, even if the Fed does nothing further. So the concern is that we're probably going to have a very strong third quarter just completed, but that some of those impacts of rates where they are, along with tighter lending in the economy, et cetera, will lead to a much slower fourth quarter, the current quarter, and that's sort of doing the Fed's work for it.
And Mark, quickly here at the end, in terms of home sales, what are we seeing with homeowners? Are they waiting to see these mortgage rates tick down before buying now?
Well, prospective homeowners are really locked out of the market right now because of the worst affordability in decades. We just had a decline in existing home sales, taking them to the lowest level since 2010. So that's an unlucky 13-year difference. And the reality is that as long as we have these yields and interest rates at these current levels, we're going to have a very slow housing market where we're having a year-over-year decline in sales of 15%.
Mark Hamrick with Bankrate. Thanks as always, Mark.
Thank you.
Well, coming up, the dangers of defecting. A new documentary highlights the horrors of fleeing North Korea and the role of faith in finding freedom when Faith Nation returns. An alarming new report from the Pentagon. In a major expansion, China now has more than 500 nuclear warheads as of this past spring. That's roughly 100 more nukes in its arsenal than last year, according to the DoD's annual China Military Power Report. The Defense Department estimates China will double that number to more than 1,000 nuclear warheads by 2030. A new documentary with a shocking inside look into North Korea. The film follows a heroic pastor dedicated to helping North Koreans find freedom. CBN's Abigail Robertson has more.
Audiences around the world are being stirred to action after seeing a new documentary called Beyond Utopia, which shows never-before-seen footage from inside North Korea, the harrowing journeys of families trying to escape, and the courageous work of a fearless pastor who trusts God to lead them to freedom.
지난 10년 동안 구출한 사람이 거의 한 1,000여 명 되는 거죠.
The documentary follows Pastor Kim as he helps a young family move through 4 countries on their path to freedom.
문을 좀 닫아주십시오. 여보세요?
목사님이십니까?
예.
방백에서 지금 사람들이 가서 지금 나왔는데요.
It also shows a free North Korean mother's desperate attempt to reunite with the son she was forced to leave behind.
그 우리 저기 북쪽에서 넘어온 아이 엄마가 지금 여기 와 있어요.
살아있대요. 제가 어떻게든 제가 어미가 돼가지고.
But even Hollywood couldn't control this outcome.
많은 사람들이 이 영화를 보고
I like to ask people to pray for me and also pray for those family who are separated their own family because of North Korean regime.
So-Yeon Lee tells CBN News she almost pulled out of the documentary when authorities captured her son attempting to escape and sent him to a North Korean prison. She remained, however,
hoping any publicity and attention might help protect him.
정말 어느 날 당국에서
Because of God and people praying here, I know that I will meet him one day.
Making the film proved to be a great risk for all involved.
It turned out to be a scarier situation than Pastor Kim anticipated or that we anticipated, but they, as documentarians, were completely game to go and document this journey.
Cohen hopes the film helps convince people the humanitarian crisis in North Korea is far worse than the world realizes.
We want them to come out more aware, more connected to people that many of them have never even thought twice about.
Filming wrapped just as the COVID shutdown began, closing borders and making it nearly impossible to escape North Korea.
During that time, Pastor Kim didn't hang around. He actually built a North Korean defectors community in South Korea.
Sunny Parker, an associate producer working at Caleb Mission with Pastor Kim, tells CBN News rescues recently resumed. New laws and stronger security measures, however, have made the cost of rescue attempts to skyrocket from about $3,000 per person pre-pandemic to $20,000.
The hard thing is that Caleb Mission is ready, Pastor Kim is ready, but saving the soul that more important to the world, we still have to raise the money.
For weeks, the film has sat at 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, and it is an Oscar hopeful that has already won multiple top film festival awards, including the Audience Award for Best U.S. Documentary at Sundance Film Festival. Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
Coming up, united in the Big Apple, a call to bring hostages home. Finally tonight, a rallying cry to bring hostages home. Hundreds of demonstrators rallied Thursday in New York City's Times Square, demanding the release of over 200 hostages taken by Hamas and being held in the Gaza Strip. A sea of Israelis and Americans came together to stand with Israel, packing Times Square with Israeli flags draped around their bodies. More than a dozen billboards also displayed the faces of those still being held captive and advocating for their safe return, as are we here as we saw those 2 hostages released today, hopefully more. Have a great weekend, everybody.